Hello and welcome to TalksOnLaw. I'm Joel Cohen. Today we're joined remotely by Brian Haara, attorney and author. Brian, welcome to TalksOnLaw.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
As two lawyers, we're talking about bourbon. Why don't we start with a legal definition? Is this actually a defined term?
It's very much defined. It's something that has been defined since the 1800s, a little more loosely then. But then by the 1960s, it made its way into the Code of Federal Regulations, and it's very heavily regulated.
First, why don't we start with what has to go into it, and then we can move on to restrictions.
Sure. All whiskey is a distillate made from grains, and bourbon is a type of whiskey. Different type of grains that can go into whiskey are barley, rye, corn, and several other grains. But the primary or the beginning definition for bourbon is that it has to be made from 51% corn. It's a majority corn whiskey. Second, it's got to be distilled to be no higher than 160 proof. And the reason there is if you start going higher than 160 proof, you're stripping away the grain flavor. And part of what makes bourbon so special is that you can taste some of the grains, the corn and the rye in your bourbon. When it's put into the barrel, it can be no higher than 125 proof. And that's for a similar reason, to have more interaction with the barrel at not so high of a proof. Now, I say the word barrel there. The CFR actually states that the term that it uses is charred new oak containers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a barrel. Everyone does use a barrel, but you could make a bucket out of new charred oak, put your distillate into it, and you could have bourbon. And then finally, when it's bottled, it has to be at least 80 proof. There's no upper limit, but it's got to be at least 80 proof in the bottle.
Didn't you say the upper limit is 160 proof?
That's when you distill it, 160 proof when distilling. The proof in the barrel can go up or down depending on where it is in the warehouse. The higher you are in a bourbon warehouse, your proof will actually increase. So you could start in the barrel at 120 proof, and then 7 years later have 137 proof. And it can go into the bottle at 137 proof and still be bourbon. It just can't go lower than 80 proof.
And for the aficionados out there, you mentioned the container must be charred new oak. New oak meaning it's fresh, it hasn't been used for any barrels in the past?
That's right. No previous use. Scotch uses bourbon barrels and sherry barrels. Tequila often uses bourbon barrels after they've been emptied. We basically get barrels ready for the rest of the whiskey world, but ours are first use. So that way they get more interaction with the char, which releases the sugars from the wood, and you get a sweeter whiskey than you find for Scotch, for example.
So that's what must go into bourbon. What about restrictions? What can't you include?
Basically, you can't include anything else. The only thing you can put into bourbon, and it still be bourbon, is pure water. Other whiskeys like Scotch, for example, you can add coloring and flavoring additives. That's prohibited in bourbon. The bourbon rule is you get your flavors from the yeast that you use in distillation, from the types of grain you use, and from the barrel. And that's it.
So there's no honey bourbon that can go under the name bourbon.
That's exactly right. Now, there is a lot of flavored whiskey that uses bourbon as its starting point. So there's honey flavored whiskey, and a lot of times that'll start with bourbon. There's, of course, cinnamon flavored whiskey, and there's bourbon that's put into other barrels after it's ready, and that's called finishing. And you can add some different flavors there, but it's technically not bourbon anymore.